in the mountains of California on the east side of the Sierra Nevada. Around me is spectacular landscape, dry peaks rising thousands of feet above these canyon floors, and at the bottom, kind of a water wonderland that really supports this particular water-loving tree that we're here to look at today. Now this tree is really special for a whole lot of reasons. It's absolutely beautiful, it dances in the wind, it spreads out more than just about any other tree on the entire continent, but one of its most impressive features is its ability to clone itself. Let's get out there and take a look at today's tree and learn how it clones itself, why it clones itself, and how you can identify these clones. I'm out here now in a grove of my friends, the Quaking Aspen tree, the tree that we'll be focusing on today. And before we get into anything, before we get into the clones, how to identify these trees, where they grow, I think what we need to do is accept the fact that aspen groves are some of the most beautiful forests in the entire world, and we need to take a moment here and just sit with these trees and look at them and hear the sounds of what an aspen forest sounds like. And if you want to skip ahead and have that short attention span and miss it, your loss. But we're gonna take some shots of aspen grove just to see what these forests feel like. So now you know that the first thing that you do when you find an aspen grove is to just immerse yourself in it because it's beautiful. But on a finer level, how do I identify these trees once we find them here? Well, we'll start with looking at the leaves, and this is going to be easiest on some of these younger trees, but often with aspens, there are younger trees around. More on that later. So these leaves here are going to be what we call cordate, meaning heart-shaped, and sometimes they taper to a very pointy tip, sometimes they taper to a much less pointy tip, and on the margins of these leaves, on their edges, there's going to be these fine serrations, these little teeth that you can track around. Watch for a bright green top side and a very light green underside. And the reason for being able to see both of these sides, and that's important, is because these are quaking aspens. And the quaking aspen part of the name of this tree is because these trees, their leaves are on a very, very two-dimensional petiole, which means leaf stem, which means when you hold it in your fingers like this, if you just twist it around in your fingers, that leaf is going to quake. And this is what happens when just the slightest little breeze touches these trees. It sets the entire canopy dancing. The whole tree will be shifting around in that breeze. Absolutely beautiful. You'll be getting that alternating bright green top, light green underside, and so very distinctive even from a distance just looking at these leaves, because when it's a forest of aspens, it's like the entire grove is rippling in the water. Absolutely beautiful, something to watch for our quaking aspen on identification. And the next identification feature for the aspen tree is going to be the bark. The bark of this tree, especially on younger ones, is going to be beautifully smooth, very white, light or green color, and you'll also be looking for these little horizontal lines on here called lenticels. These lines are little holes in the tree where the tree kind of breathes, for lack of a better word, in and out, where carbon dioxide and oxygen is exchanged from the trunk so that this tree can metabolize and make energy from stored sugars. So the other thing to notice is if you put your hand on this tree here and you rub it along, it'll come away with a little bit of a white powder on it, and that powder has actually traditionally been used as a sunscreen. So you can rub your hand across an aspen, put it on your skin, have a little bit of ultraviolet protection from this tree. Now older trees, their bark's going to look a little bit different from this white smooth bark of the young trees. As aspens grow older, they're going to get a little bit more gnarly on the bark. You'll still have these smoother white sections on here, but you'll also start getting these dark spots where branches have broken off or where something has cut into the bark a little bit. And on the oldest trees, you might expect to see thick, knobbly, dark bark covering most of the bottom of the trunk. Now, we also need to address this thing right here. each one of these carvings was put into this tree by somebody with a knife and not much empathy for the fact that this is a living being that can be affected by this even if it doesn't feel pain the same way that we do. In ancient Germany and the Celtic cultures, if you were to carve into a tree with a knife or peel off its bark, the punishment for being caught for that would be that your skin would be carved into with a knife or your skin peeled off. Kind of puts it a little bit more into perspective, right? So just some thinking with it. If you're in a relationship and you think that the way to that person's heart is to carve their name and yours into a tree, consider next time maybe just a nice card or cook them breakfast or something and avoid carving into living objects like this. What about the overall form of these trees? Well, that's a tricky one because aspens can vary quite significantly in how they look as an overall tree. From trees that are kept squashed down by snow, no more than a couple feet to a couple dozen feet tall, all the way up to incredible groves of trees dozens of feet tall and up to a couple feet across. So when looking for aspens, you really just have to know that they quake and dance in the wind, and that's how you'll be able to identify the form. Now we know a little bit about who aspen, we can ask where aspen. Where do you find one of these trees? Well, you're in luck, because if you want to see an aspen and you're in North America here, this is the most widely geographically distributed tree in the entire continent. That means that its growth covers an area larger than any other tree species here in North America. You can find them across the boreal forests of Alaska and Canada, dropping down into the Midwest and the Northeast, down the spine of the Rocky Mountains and the Sierra Nevada Mountains and Cascade Mountains of the West Coast. So this is a tree where there's a good chance that you have some relatively close to you. They also grow fairly well in cultivation and are found in a lot of places in the landscape, just in people's yards. So good chance you can get out and see one of our special aspens. So now we know how to identify aspens, how to find where they're growing. We know that they're beautiful and you should sit under them. But what's this whole clone thing that this whole video is about? Well, this is where it gets really interesting, because one crazy fact about the aspens around me here, this aspen and the aspen up here and the ones behind me here, they're not individual trees. They're actually connected underneath the soil by a root network, and they're all genetically identical clones of one another, which means that I'm not standing in a grove of aspens, I'm in the middle of one giant organism. My apologies for running off camera there, but I had to go run around in circles with excitement because that's just really freaking cool that all these trees around us are genetically identical clones of one another. But how does it work? Well, aspens also, in addition to cloning, practice sexual reproduction, which means that they produce seeds that are composed of the sexual material of two different adult trees. But these seeds very rarely germinate. They're absolutely minuscule, smaller than a 12-point font period at the end of a sentence, and they're carried on these little tufts, kind of like cottonwood fluff, and they float down and they don't have much energy. So when those seeds sprout, if anything at all goes wrong, they don't have a reserve bank to help build them up. But on the occasion that they do, you might get a single aspen tree growing from that seed. Now, over time, that aspen tree will spread its roots out under the ground, and as part of their evolutionary traits, those roots know what to do. They'll start sending up little shoots of growth that come up above the ground around our individual aspen tree that got seeded in. And over time, those new shoots will grow into full-size trees, and the root system will continue spreading, sending up new shoots every now and again. And over time, those original trees might actually die back. But because this root system has continued expanding, sending up new shoots, the organism actually lives on. And so aspens, they self-replicate these trunks, but most of what's happening with this organism is actually going on underground where we can't even see it. And they can spread out to absolutely monstrous sizes, these clonal forests. One of the largest organisms in the world, the largest one that we know of, in fact, is actually a single aspen grove. All of genetically identical trees, all connected underground, but this organism covers 106 acres of ground just by itself, this one living thing, so much larger than a giant sequoia. And so this is a different kind of situation where we have this clonal organism that can persist over this long time. And the other incredible thing about that is this means that aspen groves are basically eternal. They can live for hundreds of years, for thousands of years. In fact, some estimates have them living for over 70,000 years as a genetically identical cloning organism that just keeps self-replicating and going on into the infinity. Incredible stuff with these aspens. So let's say that you want to tell these clones apart. What if you're looking at a whole forest of aspen trees and you can't tell where does one clone end and the next one begin if it's all one forest, but maybe there's a couple of clones forming whole forests? Well, to get that, this is a great time of year to do that. I've fast forwarded ahead here in a little time machine jump into fall, and I've also moved locations. I'm now in the Rocky Mountains outside of Salt Lake City, Utah, and behind me here you can see that the aspen leaves have turned their marvelous fall color. And aspens do have some of the most spectacular fall color in the entire tree world. They can go anywhere from bright yellow to a deep red and every color in between. But the thing is, in terms of telling different clones apart, this gives us an advantage because different clones turn at different times. And what that means is when you're looking at an entire forest of aspen trees, maybe covering a whole mountain slope, some of those trees are going to change at a different rate than others, and that's going to tell you where the clones differentiate. Let's say you have one patch of forest that's a bright green growing right next to another patch of forest that's bright red, and maybe another one that's bright yellow. These might be three separate individual clones all growing together, all looking like an entire forest, and in the summertime you might not be able to differentiate them. But in the fall, thanks to their different fall colors at different times, you can figure out where one clone ends and another one begins. Now you know how to look for aspen clones and have an excuse to get out and see that spectacular fall color. Each one of these little baby aspens is a clone, and someday it will be a full-size tree. So why might it be a good idea to be able to reproduce via cloning? Well, we can start with one of the really obvious examples. Up here in mountain country, and aspens love to grow in mountain country, one of the things that we experience in the wintertime is violent avalanches crashing down the mountain and wiping out just about everything in their path. Behind me here, we see some evidence of this, where these aspens here have been broken off at the level they were sticking up above the snow, which tells me the snow here was about 9 feet deep, which is pretty deep snow. And as you can see, the avalanches that came down just knocked the top off of these aspens. Now, if this was any other tree where a single trunk represents one organism, these aspens might be in trouble. Maybe they could grow back from the lower part of the trunk, but that's a difficult proposition. You lose that extra advantage of sunlight, and maybe you grow back, but you get knocked down by another avalanche just a year later. Now with the aspens, remember, these are all interconnected organisms growing together under the ground. And that means that even though this trunk here has been mostly destroyed by this avalanche, the rest of the aspen organism gets to live onwards, and it could even send up more trunks from the roots that are still underneath this area right here. So great adaptation for surviving violent avalanches. Now even in places without snow, we can get rock slides, and the same thing will happen with aspens in these cases. In fact, sometimes aspens can even have entire branches and trunks knocked over, moved down the slope, and those trunks, even though completely disconnected from their roots, will spring out new roots and start growing into an entirely new clone of the tree, disconnected from the other ones. So really incredible adaptations for these violent mountain movings that these aspens have to put up with up here. The ability to survive forest fires is another great reason that trees like the aspen might want to be able to clone themselves. See, it's a lot easier to recover from a fire if the fire just burns all the standing trunks above ground and you have a massive root system underground full of energy ready to go. It means that when a fire goes through an aspen grove, oftentimes those aspens will just burst right back up from the roots and have an edge up on other trees who have to start over from seed. What's another good reason to clone if you're an aspen tree? You might notice that in a lot of these videos, we have water sounds in the background, and that's because, as I've mentioned before in this video, aspen trees are water lovers. Those huge organism roots take up a lot of water, and so these trees like to grow near streams, but something that comes with that is streams are dynamic places. I'm actually standing in a creek bed right now, and as you can see, there's pretty much no water around here. It's late summer, but in the springtime, when the snow is melting out of the mountains above me, this creek can actually rise up over top its banks and go tearing through the forest, ripping things up as it goes. And so if you're a tree that likes to grow along river ecosystems, as the aspen does, it really is beneficial where if the river comes along and tears off a little bit of your trunk or knocks down the whole thing, if you can sprout back from the roots after that, that's great. Even better if you can do what the aspen does, where a trunk can get knocked down, dropped downstream, and even disconnected from the root system, clone itself by sending out new roots just from the trunk. Pretty incredible stuff with that. There's one final reason that the aspens are really benefited by their ability to produce clonal babies. A final great reason to make a clone if you can is if you get eaten by something, your clone can live on doing your work. And aspens happen to be things that other things want to eat. These trees are a phenomenal forage. Up in the northern part of their range, they're going to be feeding anything from moose to elk to deer to beaver. And down here in the lower part where we don't have a lot of those huge animals, we still have the deer and the beaver, evidence of which we're seeing right here. And this is especially great because these trees like growing along water here. So as aspens get cut down by beavers or eaten by deer and moose and all those other things, they can just send up new shoots, and hopefully, if things are going well and nature is in balance, there's not enough things eating them that all of the baby clones get destroyed, and some of them will get to grow up and be full-sized forest trees that can continue spreading out the clones for years to come. Are our little aspen tree friends facing any kind of threat from people? Well, unfortunately, as is usually the case with all wild things, yes. If we as people do not manage our relationship with nature, we can end up hurting it accidentally. For the aspen tree, they do get off a little bit better than a lot of other trees. Their ability to clone themselves helps them through things like increasing wildfires up in Canada, and also allows them to pop back up with extra vigor, but there are limits to it. For example, here in the American West, one of the things that we're seeing as a result of climate change is many more years with extreme drought. And remember, this is a water-loving tree with massive root systems and a whole lot of trunks that it needs to get water to. So when we have those drought years as a result of climate change from burning fossil fuels, we see declines in aspens. In addition to that, heavy grazing, we've established that this tree is a beloved forage of a lot of different animals, and that includes our livestock. And so if we release our livestock into aspen groves year after year without giving them a chance to send up the clones to a height above the level that those livestock can reach, over time, eventually the old trunks will start to die off without new growth to take their places. So we can manage our relationship with nature better to make sure that aspens get to persist in all of their beauty into the future. The next time you're out and about in the forest, take a look around you, look for the dancing trees, and see if you can spot a quaking aspen. And remember how these trees connect you with the rest of the natural world. This here's an aspen tree. You can tell it's an aspen because of the way it is. Somebody already did that? Oh. Hi everybody, I hope you enjoyed this last tree video. If you want to learn a lot more about trees, you can keep up with this page by subscribing to it. And if you want to help it grow a little bit more, please consider sharing these videos out to more friends.